Then the man dropped into what seemed to him the most comfortable and satisfying sleep he had ever known. The dog sat facing him and waiting. The brief day ended in a long evening. There was no signs of a fire to be made. Never in the dog's experience had it known a man to sit like that in the snow and make no fire. As the evening grew darker, its eager longing for the fire mastered it. With much lifting of its feet, it cried softly. Then it flattened its ears, expecting the man's curse. But the man remained silent. Later, the dog howled loudly, and still later it moved close to the man and caught the smell of death. This made the animal back aware. A little longer it delayed, howling under the stars that leaped and danced and shone brightly in the cold sky. Then it turned and ran along the trail towards the camp it knew, where there were other food providers and fire providers. Jack London's short story, To Build a Fire, is a story about a man heading along the Yukon Trail on his way to a camp with some of his buddies. Following him is a native dog. Because of the temperature, he had to build a fire, and after the first fire, he continued along the trail, but unfortunately fell into a creek. He tried to build another fire, but his second fire failed as a tree branch full of snow smothered it. We now see him trying to build a third fire with his freezing fingers. The old man on Silver Creek was right, he thought in the moment of controlled despair that followed. After 50 below zero, a man should travel with a companion. He beat his hands, but failed to produce any feeling in them. Suddenly, he bared both hands, removing the minge with his teeth. He caught the whole pack of matches between his hands. His arm muscles were not frozen. He was able to press the hands tightly against the matches. Then, he drew the whole pack along his leg. It burst into flames, 70 matches at once. There was no wind to blow them out. He kept his head to one side to escape the burning smell and held the flaming pack to the tree bark. As he held it, he noticed some feeling in his hand. His flesh was burning. He could smell it. The feeling developed into pain. He continued to endure it. He held the flame and matches to the bark that would not light readily because his own burning hands were taking most of the flame. Finally, when he could endure no more, he pulled his hands apart. The flaming matches fell into the snow, but the tree bark was burning. He began laying dry grasses and tiny sticks to the flame. He could not choose carefully because they must be pieces that his frozen hands could lift. Small pieces of green grass stayed on the sticks, and he bit them off as well as he could with his teeth. He treated the flame carefully. It meant life. It must not cease. The blood had left the surface of his body and now began to shake from the cold. A large piece of wet plant fell on the little fire. He tried to push it out with his fingers, but his shaking body made him push too far, and he scattered the little fire over a wide space. He tried to press the burning grass and sticks together again. Even with the strong effort he made, his trembling fingers would not obey, and the sticks were hopelessly scattered. Each stick smoked a little and died. The fire provider had failed. As he looked around him, his eyes noticed a dog sitting across the ruins of the fire from him. He was making uneasy movements, slightly lifting one foot and then the other. The sight of the dog put a wild idea into his head. He remembered the story of a man caught in a storm who killed an animal and sheltered himself inside the dead body and thus was saved. He would kill the dog, and he'd bury his hands in the warm body until the feeling returned to them. Then he could build another fire. He spoke to the dog, calling it to him, but his voice was a strange note of fear that frightened the animal. It had never known the man to speak in such a tone before. Something was wrong, and it sensed danger. It knew not what danger, but somewhere in its brain there was a fear of the man. It flattened his ears at the sound of the man's voice. Its uneasy movements and lifting of its feet became more noticeable. But it would not come to the man. He got down on his hands and knees and went toward the dog. But this unusual position again excited fear, and the animal moved away. The man sat in the snow for a moment and struggled for calmness. Then he pulled on his mittens, using his teeth, and then stood on his feet. He glanced down to assure himself that he was really standing, because the lack of feeling in his feet gave him no retaliation to the earth. His position, however, removed the fear from the dog's mind. When he commanded the dog with his usual voice, the dog obeyed and came to him. As it came within his reach, the man lost control. His arms stretched out to hold the dog, and he experienced real surprise when he discovered that his hands could not grasp. There was neither bend nor feeling in the fingers. He had forgotten for a moment that they were frozen, and they were freezing more and more. All this happened quickly, and before the animal could escape, he encircled its bodies with his arms. He sat down in the snow, and in the fashion held the dog, while it barked and struggled. But it was all he could do. Hold its body encircled in his arms, and sit there. He realized that he could not kill the dog. There was no way to do it. With his frozen hands, he could neither draw nor hold his knife, nor could he grasp the dog around the throat. He freed it, and it dashed away, still barking. It stopped 40 feet away and observed him curiously, with ears sharply bent forward. The man looked down at his hands to look at them, and found them hanging on the ends of his arms. He thought it curious that it was necessary to use his eyes to discover where his hands were. He began waving his arms, beating the mitted hands against his sides. He did this for 5 minutes. His heart produced enough blood to stop the shaking, but no feeling was created in his hands. Thank you.